This is my Nikon AIS 50mm f1.2 lens. It is one of my favorite Nikon lens and also one of the few f1.2 lens that Nikon has created for their f-mount cameras. This lens was originally released back in 1981, but if you want, you can still buy a brand new copy of this lens today. Now, 40 years after the AIS 50mm f1.2 lens was released, Nikon has just released another new 50mm f1.2 lens, and this time it is the Nikon Z 50mm f1.2S lens. So in this video, we are going to have a look at this new lens and also do a bit of comparison with this AIS 50mm f1.2 lens just to see what's the difference between these two 50mm f1.2 lens that were released with a 40 years time difference in between. What's the biggest improvement if you compare these two lenses? Why this new lens is so much bigger and so much heavier? And also, maybe, is there anything that I actually still prefer with the AIS lens over the new lens? Kia ora, good morning everyone, Roger Wong here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to have a look at this new Nikon Z 50mm f1.2S lens. It is one of the first f1.2 autofocus lens that Nikon created for their Z-mount mirrorless cameras. So let's start this review by talking about the design and quality of this lens first. The design and build quality of this 50mm f1.2S lens is very similar to the other Nikon professional Z-mount lenses. It feels pretty solid and it definitely feels very heavy because the weight of this lens is just over 1 kilogram. So it is pretty much exactly 3 times the weight of the AIS 50mm f1.2 lens. There is a little display at the top of the lens which you can use it to display either the focus distance or the aperture setting. The display is really bright, so you have no problem reading it even when you're shooting in the middle of the day. And when you're changing the settings, it updates instantly with very small amount of lag, and also the animation when you're changing the settings is very smooth. Next to the display and the display button, you have a customizable buttons here, so you can assign different settings that you want that can be controlled by this button. We have a large focus ring at the top which feels quite smooth, and then we have another smaller customizable ring at the bottom which you can assign different settings to it. For example, you can use it to change the aperture value or the exposure compensation. The lens has a 82mm front filter thread, which is huge for a 50mm lens. Overall, the build quality of this 50mm f1.2 lens is definitely very good and is very hard to comprehend. But having said that, I still find something magical about how Nikon build their older AIS lenses. When you hold it onto your hand, the full metal construction of the AIS lens, and also like how all the markings are engraved on the lens. And when you turn the focus ring, the mechanical focus ring, the feedback just feels fantastic, and it's something that the newer lenses just can't give you. This 50mm f1.2S lens uses stepping motors for autofocus, and according to Nikon, this is possible because of the large diameter of the new Z-mount for their mirrorless cameras. The autofocus performance is very good. The autofocus speed is very fast, very smooth, and also there is virtually no noise at all. I shot a lot of photos at f1.2 just using the eye and face autofocus, and the overall accuracy is just excellent even when I check the photos at 100% or 200% zoom level. And I also shot some video to see how the autofocus works in video mode. I think the result is very good as well. Have a look at this sample video that I shot at f1.2 and just using the eye face autofocus, and you can see the camera and the lens together managed to follow me very well even though it has a very shallow depth of field. Okay, now let's have a look at the image quality and let's do some comparison with the AIS 50mm f1.2 lens as well. So the first comparison I want to show you are two photos that I shot at f1.2 and both with identical camera setting including white balance. The photo from the new 50mm f1.2s lens is approximately 0.25 EV brighter than the photo from the AIS 50mm f1.2 lens. So this is pretty impressive consider the new 50mm f1.2s lens has a lot more element. It has 17 lens element compared to the AIS lens which only has 7 elements. The photo from the AIS lens also appears to be slightly cooler in terms of the color temperature and also has a slightly more green color cast compared to the photo from the 50mm f1.2s lens. The field of view from the 50mm f1.2s lens seems to be a little bit tighter than the AIS lens. And next, let's have a look at the image sharpness. And actually, even before I did the image sharpness test, I already know this 50mm f1.2s lens is a very sharp lens because when I look at some of the photos I shot at f1.2, for example, look at this photo. This photo was shot at f1.2 with the Z7 II, and if you zoom in the photo, I can see myself from the reflection on my daughter's eye. And yes, it was shot at maximum aperture f1.2 and I just used the eye autofocus and I convert the raw file to JPEG using Lightroom with no sharpening added. So this is pretty much just using all the default sharpness settings and the result is very impressive. Now let's have a look at this test photo shot with the 50mm f1.2s lens at f1.2. If we zoom in the photo and look at the center of the image, you can see that even at the maximum aperture, the center sharpness is already excellent. While the center sharpness could improve a little bit if I stop down to f2 or around f2.8, the difference is very small because at f1.2, the lens is already very sharp. There is simply no comparison if I put the photo that I shot with the AIS 50mm f1.2 lens at f1.2 side by side with the photo shot with the 50mm f1.2s lens. The photo from the AIS lens is much softer. There's quite a bit of glow and also the contrast is quite a bit lower as well. And even if I stop down all the way to f5.6, the AIS lens center sharpness is still not exactly as good as the 50mm f1.2s lens at f1.2. And this just shows you how crazily sharp this new lens is. If we look at the corner, the 50mm f1.2s lens at f1.2 is also pretty sharp as well. Well, it's a little bit not as sharp as the center at f1.2, but overall it is still very impressive. Stop down to f2 and now the corner sharpness become excellent. With the AIS lens, the corner at f1.2 is definitely very soft. Even stop down to f2, the corner is still quite soft. When I stop down to f4, now I say the corner sharpness become pretty good, very similar to the 50mm f1.2 lens at f2. I also did a bit of sharpness comparison with the Sigma 50mm f1.4 art lens, which many people would say this is the sharpest 50mm autofocus lens that is available for the Nikon F mount. Look at this comparison photo. The left is Sigma at f1.4 and the right is the Nikon 50mm f1.2s lens at f1.2. If you zoom in the photo, you can see the Nikon is actually a little bit sharper even though it is at a faster aperture. If I then compare the photo both shot at f1.4 and you can see the difference is even bigger. And if we look at the corner, once again, the Sigma is slightly softer than the Nikon, even though the Nikon is at f1.2 while the Sigma is at f1.4. So overall, in terms of the image sharpness, this Nikon 50 f1.2s lens is not only much sharper than the AIS lens. It is also sharper than the Sigma Art 50 f1.4 lens, even if you are shooting at the maximum aperture f1.2 with the Nikon lens. When shooting at f1.2, the way how this 50mm f1.2s lens render the autofocus area is probably the most creamy and most beautiful I've ever seen with any 50mm lens. Look at some of these photos and I just love the way how it render the autofocus area. Both the foreground and background area just looks absolutely delicious. There could be a little bit of cat's eye bokeh at corner when shooting at f1.2, especially when your subject is at a close distance, but it's not too crazy. Overall, the bokeh from the 50 f1.2s lens is just as creamy and smooth as you can get from a 50mm lens. In comparison, the bokeh from the AIS lens look completely different. You can say it has character, or you can say it looks very nervous, but it's definitely not the creamy look that the 50 f1.2s lens can give you. While I myself don't really mind. Actually, I quite like the bokeh from the AIS lens, and that's why I bought that lens myself. I think most people would probably prefer the much smoother and more creamy bokeh from the 50 f1.2s lens. The 50mm f1.2s lens flare control is excellent. Most of my photos and video, I see virtually no lens flare at all. Even if you look at this test video, the amount of lens flare is still kept at a very minimal level. And if you look at this similar video I shot with the AIS lens, you can see the huge difference in terms of lens flare control. There is a lot more lens flare and ghosting with the AIS lens. And also look at this set of comparison photo that I shot on a sunny day around midday. You can see there are some pretty big ghosting on the photo that I shot with the AIS lens. With the 51.2s lens at the maximum aperture, vignetting is noticeable but not terrible. Stop down to f2, then you have very minimal amount of vignetting. Put the test photo from the AIS lens side by side, you can see the AIS lens has slightly more vignetting at the same aperture value. The difference is quite noticeable when I stop down the lens slightly to around f1.4 or f2. But if I'm completely honest, I would say I'm still slightly disappointed by the amount of vignetting I saw with the 50 f1.2s lens, and the reason is because this lens has a pretty large front element and it has a 82mm front filter thread, so I was expecting the vignetting would be very good. But if I compare this lens with the Sigma 51.4 lens, both at f1.4, the Sigma actually has slightly less vignetting than the Nikon. Look at these two photos that I both shot at f1.2 using the 51.2s lens and the AIS lens. Even if you ignore the fact that the AIS lens is quite a bit softer and there's quite a bit more glow even in the in-focus area, you can see the AIS lens has a lot more chromatic aberration compared to the 51.2s lens. The 51.2s lens still has some chromatic aberration, but it is very well controlled even when shooting a high contrast scene like this one. In terms of distortion, look at this brick wall photo. The 51.2s lens has very minimal amount of distortion. On the other hand, the AIS lens has a lot more noticeable distortion. The 18-point sunstars from the 51.2s lens looks very nice, especially when I stop down to f16. The AIS lens also render 18-point sunstars because it also has the 9 aperture braid design, and the sunstars actually looks very nice. I would even say I prefer the sunstars from the AIS lens. It just looks a little bit cleaner and just a little bit more pleasing to my eyes. The 50 f1.2s lens has excellent chroma control, which make it very suitable for astrophotography or nighttime landscape. Check out this photo that I zoom in at 200%. You can see there's very minimal amount of chroma. Even the photo was shot with the high resolution Nikon Z7 II. In comparison, the AIS lens definitely has a lot worse chroma control. When you look at this comparison photo, you can see the amount of chroma is a lot worse than the 50-1.2S lens. Videographers will love this 50-1.2S lens. Not only the autofocus noise and the performance is very good, the amount of focus breathing is also kept at a very minimal level. So if you look at this test video, you will see virtually no focus breathing at all when I change the focus from minimal focus distance to infinity. Watch this comparison video shot with the AIS lens and you can see there are some pretty noticeable focus breathing with the AIS lens. I've mentioned quite a few times on this channel before, but usually lenses are designed with lots of compromises. There are compromises because of the price, the size, or maybe the lens is specially optimized for one type of usage, so there will be some trade-off in terms of image quality in some area. Everyone can make f1.2 or even faster lenses. Nikon has made a few f1.2 lenses in the past, even for their relatively small diameter f-mount camera system. But then there's a huge difference between a good f1.2 lens and a great f1.2 lens. And this new Nikon Z 50mm f1.2S lens is a lens that with virtually no compromise in terms of optical quality. This lens is pretty much as perfect as it could be in every single area. It is very sharp from center to corner even at the maximum aperture. It has excellent lens flare control. Bokeh is absolutely beautiful. There's very minimal amount of distortion and even the sun stars are beautiful. The AIS 50mm f1.2 lens, it is still a very good lens 40 years after it was released, but you can easily see Nikon has made a lot of compromises when they designed that lens. So even though I still really like the AIS lens, I would honestly say its performance is really nowhere close to the new 50-1.2S lens. But why this new 50-1.2S lens is so much better? I think a large part of it was probably due to the AIS lens was created 40 years ago, but I also believe a large part of it is due to its using the new Z mount, which is much larger in diameter, and that gives the lens designer a lot more flexibility and also freedom to create something that is dramatically better than the old 50-1.2 lens. There are really not that many things that I don't like about this new 50-1.2S lens. The price, maybe I wish it is a little bit cheaper, but if you look at the image quality of this lens, I think the price is very reasonable. However, I still prefer the manual focus ring on the old AIS lens. It's fully mechanical focus ring, just feel buttery smooth and the control just feel more direct to me. Now, as a wedding photographer, I would have no problem to carry a lens like this when I am shooting weddings or when I'm shooting portrait, because quite often I will be carrying the 70-200 f2.8 lens on one of my camera anyway, and this lens is smaller than that. So if I have one of these lenses, I would definitely be very happy to carry this lens because the image quality is so nice and the out of focus area is rendered so beautifully with this lens. But for example, when I'm out, say in the weekend with the family, or just go out for a walk that I'm not actually doing any jobs, this lens, the size and the weight may be a little bit too much for me. Now, having said that, when I'm reviewing this lens, I did carry out with me when I was out there with the family, so this is something that is definitely doable. Maybe it is just one of the price that you have to pay for a virtually perfect f1.2 lens.